welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today, I'm really excited about my project. I'm doing something kind of different for this channel. I mean, I'm still following a pattern, but today I'm going to follow this folklore pattern. So this is the folkwear, not folklore, Austrian Drindl pattern. I think this pattern looks really cute. And I've been intrigued. I have a couple of their patterns. I have some Victorian patterns and Edwardian patterns for that as well. I'm going to do the shorter version, I think. We're not doing the apron, but we are going to do everything else that's in this pack. Then I'm going to do, there's a one with the bodice up higher. That's the blouse I'm going to do. And I think that for the dirndl itself, I'll also be doing the higher bodice. So it is, I don't know if you can tell, I don't know if you can hear in the background. It is gross out right now. It's really, really stormy and dark outside, so I'm not super enjoying that, which is why we stay in and we sew. But let's talk fabrics. So the first fabric I am using here is, it's this beautiful, it's called a Dobby fabric. I think it's a rayon, but it has these little dots to it. It's really hard to see. I bet you'll be able to see when I finally like cut it out and start working with it. But yeah, it's really lovely. And I think it'll make it really pretty. And I plan on using this blouse under a lot of my different things. And then for the dress, I'm pretty excited about this. So first I have this very, very, very nice dark green velvet. So this will be just for the dirndl bodice. And then for the skirt, I'm bringing back the unicorns. So this is a fabric I designed for making my dream gunny sacks a few months ago. And I just went in and I had already made a green version from that past video, but I also went in and I darkened up the greens. So hopefully these pair together a little bit better. I'm feeling kind of like this is very fairy tale inspired to me. So I'm pretty excited about this. I think this is going to be loads of fun to make and be really creative and fun. The last fabric I just have back here is I'm going to fully line the bodice because it is velvet and I need to be able to press it. This is leftover fabric from when I made my Hocus Pocus costume. So I am not familiar at all with Folkwear Patterns, so this will be a journey. I feel like I've heard mixed things about them. So the first thing I'm going to do, which I think I'll be doing off camera, is I'm going to real quick make up just a mock-up of the bodice to figure out my size. I just decided I wanted to go ahead and make up a mock bodice because this is the same velvet I used in a recent project and it's like $32 a yard, so it's pretty spendy. So I don't want to cut into this until I'm sure what I'm making is actually going to fit me. And then once I figure out my size from that mock-up, that'll be the size that I do across all the pieces. That is the plan. Let's go ahead and jump into making my mock-up. To begin my mock-up, I first started by tracing out the pattern size that I thought would fit me. The reason I didn't just cut out the pattern piece is that would then obviously destroy all the other sizes, and the whole point of this mock-up was to confirm the size that I needed. Also here, I spent a little bit of time on tracing the wrong pattern piece because there are a lot of different bodice backs, and I chose the wrong one to trace, so I had to trace 3 pieces instead of just 2. Lucky me. And then after I had those all traced out, I went ahead and I put them onto my mock-up fabric. And then this is how it all sewed up. I did it off camera because I'll obviously show you when I do the real thing. This looks pretty good to me, so I went ahead and I cut out the pattern pieces in this size. The first fabric that I cut was the unicorn fabric, and cut is a loose term here. Because these were all even rectangles, I went ahead and I ripped the fabric to be the proper size. This is just easier for me than cutting, and I prefer it. And then for the real cutting, I first cut it out of the lining fabric, which was just a basic cotton. I had used this in a previous project, which was my Hocus Pocus costume, and I still had plenty left over, so I went ahead and used it for this one. And then last was the velvet. This was by far the trickiest fabric. It was a little bit slick, and it was also wrinklier because I hadn't ironed it, because velvet and pile and all that jazz. It just took a little bit more finessing to get this one cut out. And yes, I really wish I was done cutting, but I'm not. Here, I'm going ahead and I am cutting out the blouse. I was going to put off this cutting, but I don't like cutting and I then have to move all my furniture and stuff to cut. So I just grit my teeth and got through the cutting. Good morning. So we've made it through cutting all of the fabric out. Today my plan is basically just to get the dress done and then save the shirt for tomorrow, because I'm kind of trying to make some decisions around the shirt and like what will make it most functional for me, which is going to include some alterations to the pattern. Today we're not thinking about the blouse, we're just thinking about the dress. So decisions that have to happen today is buttons. I haven't quite figured out what buttons I want. Like if I want to do velvet covered buttons or if I want to do like a contrast button. I haven't quite decided on any of those, or if I don't want to do buttons at all and just want to do hooks and then maybe do decorative buttons. So my bet is I'm gonna go hooks with decorative buttons. I have a couple dirndls that I really like that have like a ton of pearl buttons up the front, and I just don't feel like putting that many buttonholes in velvet if that's the route that I go. That's kind of the things on my mind for today. I think this should be fairly straightforward. The bodice and the skirt for this is really simple. The biggest thing I have to watch out for with this pattern, which I debated retracing and cutting things a little bit differently. So basically, this pattern has like a bunch of different seam allowances depending on the part, and I really hate that. For me, for patterns, I really prefer that all the seam allowances are the same, because the second you start switching all your seam allowances, it becomes way like more mentally draining to make something. So I'm not super thrilled about that, and that's the biggest thing I have to watch out for today. With that in mind, that's just something I'm kind of thinking about. It is 10:30. I had planned on getting started at this at 9, but Spooky was really snuggly, and it was very hard to get out of bed this morning because she was so snuggly, and then I needed to clean and do stuff like that. So yeah, I'll be starting this at 10:30. I'm hoping to, like I said, wrap up the dress today. That should be doable because, like I said, this is a really simple dress. I'm very stuffed up from allergies, goodness. But with that, let's just, actually no, I want Spooky to say hi. She's right under me. Oh, she did not want to say hi. That was very a rebellious thing of her. I wanted her to say hi since she's the reason I was slow to start today. Huh, Spooky? Were you too cute and cuddly? She does not look cute and cuddly right now. I mean, she does look cute, just not cuddly. Goodbye. Okay, she's gonna hop onto the windowsill instead. So we're just gonna go ahead and hop right in. Also for probably about 2 hours, take lunch, and then hopefully wrap it up before it gets dark out. That's the other thing, is we're now reaching the time of year that's kind of hard for me to do these sewing videos because it's dark until about 8 o'clock in the morning, and then it gets dark again by like 5. But we're gonna hop into it. We're gonna get going. We're gonna get motivated. So yes. As almost always with most patterns, we are starting with the darts. Here I'm just marking them with my tool. And then here I am going ahead and I'm putting the darts in the velvet. The velvet was quite hard to work with. It was very slick. So I had to kind of really work with my machine and the tension to get everything going well and not so bubbly. In contrast, this basic cotton fabric was much easier than the velvet. And then for pressing the darts, the cotton I just pressed like usual, but with the velvet, what I did was I laid it down really lightly. I cut the bulk of the dart out, and then I just really lightly ironed it. I was not pressing very hard at all with this. I was just trying to not mess up the pile, but also get the darts to point in the way that I wanted them to. And then the instructions have me first sewing the neckline and the armholes together and leaving the shoulders open so that way I can sew this together later, which you will see. And sewing this was a little bit tricky for a couple of reasons. The velvet was just really slick against the cotton, and so I just had to move pretty slowly. And then also one of the challenges with it was I was working with 1/4 inch seam allowances because I forgot to cut the extra. I like to usually work with a bigger seam allowance because I just feel like it helps with those slippery situations. With those sewn together, I am now clipping my corners, my edges, all that jazz, cutting down them, and then I am flipping them inside out, and then I can give them a fairly decent press on the cotton side, again being just a little bit more careful than normal when I press to make sure I don't squish the velvet. And then I am just sewing the velvet to velvet part of the shoulder. The lining is folded forward and out of the way, so that way, yeah, I just get that edge, so that way I can actually enclose all of the seams on this bodice. Here you can see me iron and kind of close that lining, which I will then do with some hand seam work. Here I am just tacking that down because of how much this shifted on the velvet. It was a little bit challenging to close this, so it's a little bit of rigged hand sewing here. And while this might not be the most appealing looking lunch, this is a chickpea faux tuna salad sandwich thing that I put together because, as always, just a reminder on this channel, when we sew, we take care of our bodies and we make sure we're fueling them, because you put a lot of energy out when you sew, and it's important to take in enough calories. And we're back after lunch. We're all ready to tackle this skirt. I am just sewing up the side seams. Nothing special here. These are finished edges, so I basically just need to sew them up. And then I'm going ahead and I am ironing the seam open. It is always such a satisfying part of sewing. And then this dress has that front placket. So I am just stitching like those two flap end things down, just keeping them nice and clean. This is what the instructions tell me to do. And I'm also reinforcing the bottom of the seam, so that way the thread is less likely to snap below it. And now I'm going ahead and I am just turning up the bottom of the skirt up like a 1/4 inch and seaming that down, just so that way when I turn up the seam for the real hem, it will be nice and clean on the edges. While I am here at the sewing machine, I'm going to go ahead and put in those 3 rows of gathering stitch. The pattern only calls for 2, but as you guys know on this channel, I really prefer to do 3. Also, I somehow failed to record the footage of this, but I also went ahead and did 3 rows of hand stitching below this, each a 1/2 inch apart, to have the shearing that we're going to see later in this video. This was incredibly painstaking, and I can't believe I got no footage, considering it took about 3 hours, which is longer than most of the making of this dress. And then here I am pulling those gathering stitches through to then attach to the bodice, making sure everything aligns and fits. To be clear, I am pulling the gathering lines, not the shirring lines. Those lines will happen later. You will see that at the very end of this video. And then I'm going ahead and I'm stitching that to the velvet part of the bodice. This will then tuck up inside the lining and hide this raw edge. I had to go pretty slowly here because, again, the velvet is very, very slick. And then here I am pinning down the lining in the bodice to cover that raw, kind of ugly looking waist seam. And then here I am doing the hand sewing of the dress. This is the last thing I'm doing tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and get the hem sewed as well as sew down that waistline seam. Good morning. So yesterday, because I insisted on hand shearing this, it took a lot longer than I thought it would, so we are a little bit behind now. I still haven't finished the dress. It's right here. It's pretty close. Basically, all I need to do is put in the buttonholes on the machine, and then other than that, I'm done machine sewing, and I'll just have the hand sewing of putting on the buttons and snaps and everything that makes it like function as a dress and clothes, you know? So basically I have all of this, which I'll show you when I actually do it. I have stuff in place to shear it once I can actually try it on with all the closures. So that is, I guess, the plan for this. Everything's hemmed. It's all good to go. So today I can mostly focus on this shirt. I think I'll focus on finishing the dress after I finish the shirt. Like, I think I want to focus on machine sewing earlier today and then move to hand sewing later this evening. So you're gonna see a little bit more mixed footage. For the shirt, I have decided I don't want like the slash in the front with the tie. I'm gonna move that over to the back, and instead of the tie, I think I'm gonna have it either snap or hook and eye, or maybe even button. We'll see. We'll see what we're feeling. I just think for me, that's what makes sense. And for it to be like a more functional piece, that's what makes sense for me. I'm hoping it looks okay. Fingers crossed. I am going to need to make quite a bit of bias tape today, so that's always fun. I'm feeling pretty good on finishing this still within the allotted time. I did spend almost 3 hours hand shearing last night, and I definitely am a little over hand sewing from that. So yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and hop right into it today. So the first thing I am doing is I am putting down my buttonhole gauge to just mark the buttonholes. So yes, could I do this with the actual pattern marks? Sure. But do I like my buttonhole gauge, and is it more convenient? Yes. And then we're just using my buttonhole foot to stitch this together. I do want to note I did some practice buttonholes and I did have to adjust them because of how slippery the velvet was. Always, 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 always do a practice buttonhole in your material before you do it. On the real thing, you will be sad if you don't. And now with all the machine stitching for that dress done, I can switch my bobbin color without having to switch it back, which is always a priority. So here the first thing I'm doing is I am pinning on the slash that is going to go on the back. And then once I have sewn that down, I am being really, really, really intentional with the cutting and the turning of this, because if you don't get it as close as you can to the very end stitches without actually stitching through them, it will have a bunch of weird wrinkles in it. So I am just trying to be really, really deliberate and get this as smooth as possible. And then after that is done, I have put my gathering stitches around the neckline and I am pinning both the shoulders and the sides of this together. And then I am sewing these down because I forgot to cut enough for French seams. We are going to seam bind this using some seam binding I have in my stash. So first we just sew that down on the edge beyond the seam into the seam allowance, and then after that is done, I will fold it over and sew it down on the other side. This will create basically the look of French seams. It would have been much nicer if I'd remembered to cut them in the first place, but when you forget, you just figure it out. And then I need one long strip of bias tape to go around the neck to be the neckline binding. So that is what I am working on here. I need it to just be 2 inches wide, so that way it is a 1/2 inch bias binding because it's going to fold over 4 times, therefore equaling a 1/2 inch. Before I put in the neck binding, I'm real quick slip stitching the facing down so that way it is already out of the way, done, and it is sitting exactly the way it will sit when I put that neckline bias on it. And the next thing was figuring out the gatherings. I said to gather all the gathers down to 2 inches. I then tried to put that over my head and my head did not fit through it. So I then expanded it to actually be the gathers 4 inches because that is what would allow my head to comfortably pass through without a giant struggle. And ultimately the goal is wearable clothes. If I make this blouse again, I'm actually just going to make the cutout, the slit that I made, just like about 1 inch, maybe 2 longer, because I would prefer that be longer and then keep the gathers the same. And then I'm just pinning that down to my bias. I have a little helper that joined me for that. So helpful. And then once I have that, I am stitching that down. So a lot of times in a bias binding, you'll stitch it wrong on the wrong side and then you'll fold it up over the right side and top stitch that. Because this was going to have hand slip stitching, I am having it on the wrong side, because then I will fold it over and make it look really, really nice on the outside with the pressing, and then the inside can just be slipped stitched down relatively roughly, which is what I am doing right here. I did not feel like going and sitting on the couch because at this point in the evening, I suspected if I sat down, I would not be getting back up again. And now we are ready to prep the sleeves. I'm first putting in the gathering lines for gathering the top of the sleeves, and then I am going to go ahead and French seam them down the side. And here I am hemming the sleeves. I am turning it up once, just about 1/4 inch, sewing it down, and then I'll turn it up and go back around it again. This is not how all people do a narrow hem, but it's what works best for me. Those self-rolling feet never work particularly well for me. And then I am just marking around with my water-soluble pen to go ahead and make sure that the tape that I will sew in to put the elastic in will be even around the edge. And then this is just the same seam binding tape I used for other parts of the garment. And so here I am sewing the top down before then going back and sewing it down the other side to make a channel to put in the elastic. And then here I am just using a safety pin with elastic to guide it through the seam binding. And with the sleeves done, we are ready to put them on the bodice. So here I am pre-gathering the sleeves before I stick them on, so that way it's easier because I can just ungather them to make them match up with all the different points here that I need them to match up with. This was pretty easy and straightforward, and I did just enjoy working with this fabric. Even though it was a rayon and kind of in theory harder to work with, it was actually quite easy, and I think I might purchase this fabric again for more white blouses in the future. And then here I'm just sewing down and around the sleeve head, sewing that gathered edge to the non-gathered edge. I always sew with the gathered edge down, so that way I can make sure that top edge is not getting any weird wrinkles in it. And then before I put on the seam binding, I am pulling out all those gathering stitches. I do that before the seam binding. That way I just have as few as possible loose threads like hanging around on a finished garment. I feel like it's easier to deal with them in small batches than to deal with them all at once in the end. At least that's how it works for me. And then we are again using that seam binding technique for the sleeve head. This just again keeps all the seams finished and makes it so I don't have to think about how to do gathered and French seams at the same time, because that would be a nightmare. We are getting really close. I am working on making the channel for the bodice. It has you putting in a ribbon in the pattern, but I wanted this to just be easy and be elastic, so I am creating a channel for that. It's basically the same process, just what I stick in it will be different. And basically I've narrow hemmed this, and then I'm folding it up a little bit more than a 1/2 inch for the elastic channel, and I'm gonna leave just a little patch open. Here I am stitching that down, and again I am just leaving a small opening to put the elastic through. And I've basically measured where this will hit on my rib cage, and I've made elastic, and I've just taken 1 inch from it, so it'll just be a little bit tighter and won't like floop around down there. I would like it to stay pretty secure under the bust. So that was my method in measuring, since obviously the pattern didn't call for this and I had nothing else to really work with. And here I'm just feeding that through the channel the same way I did with the sleeves, with a safety pin up at the front. And here I am stitching that tiny opening I had for the elastic channel down, so that way the elastic is firmly in place. And then all we have left is me sewing the button hole thingy that's hanging off the edge. You can see me work on it here, and then eventually sewing the button down as well. I went with these instead of tie strings in the back just because I think a button is more secure and easier to work with. And we've had a silly little cat join us. I don't think she realized she was going to be so in on the action, little gremlin. And here I am just stitching on the buttons for the dress. This was one of the last steps I had. I have feelings about these buttons, but they were the best I had in my stash, so they'll have to do for now. And don't worry, all you're seeing is a slip here underneath, but I am here pulling the shirring. The instructions specifically told you to put on the dress and pull the shirring or gathering stitches until they like conform to your body. So that's what I'm attempting to do here. This was interesting. I don't know if I'll keep these forever, if there's a point where I will take the shirring stitches out, but for right now we're keeping them. And with that, this is my final step and we are ready for the reveal. Alright, you've seen the reveal. Before I hop into my final thoughts on this pattern and the wrap up, let's first talk about what it costs to make this project. As always, we got a spreadsheet. So for this project, I spent quite a bit on fabric because that luxury velvet fabric was quite expensive. I don't know if I feel like it was 100% worth it on this project. It definitely looks nicer than a lot of velvets that I've worked with. I don't know, it's also like more precarious because it's on my bodice and that's probably where I'm gonna spill. And then of course, custom printing my own fabric is always pretty expensive and I'm never quite happy with the quality at Spoonflower. So that brought us to a fabric total of $144.84. I definitely have enough velvet left over for another shirt, and then I actually have quite a bit of the green unicorn fabric left over as well. Like I say on this channel often, I tend to overbuy because nothing is worse than being short on fabric on a project. So I could definitely obviously reduce my costs if I didn't buy that much of each yardage, but that's how much I need to buy to feel comfortable doing a project. So it does factor into the cost. As far as notions were pretty cheap. I just had needed some buttons, some snaps, things like that. Hi, Spunk. Hey, We're in a different location because it's gotten real dark out. Which means you get more spooky time probably. Notions were only $6.54. This is just, I took 3 snaps and 6 buttons and some thread and some seam binding, and that is all. So I added all those up. The last thing was the pattern. The pattern was $25.89. This was for shipping and everything. I don't know if this is like the normal price of a folkwear pattern. I don't super buy their patterns except for when I see them at the thrift stores, so you can tell me if that was me overpaying for this pattern. I couldn't find it on Folkwear at the time, but now I've had an easier time finding it after I make it, of course. So that brings me to supplies total of $177.74. Considering this is both a blouse and the dirndl, that is definitely worth it for me. I think of like back in Germany when I was there, like a good quality dirndl like this was quite expensive and would probably cost me about this amount of money. So definitely worth it. And you know, having my own custom print and vision is always really, really fun. And then for labor, again, this is the dress and the shirt, and they together took me 14 hours. I feel like that's a pretty reasonable time considering I made 2 pieces. Both of them included some new techniques I hadn't really done before. I would love your guys' opinion actually down below, those of you who've been around for a while and seen these recaps. I kind of think I want to change it to how much a living wage in Seattle is instead of how much a seamstress gets paid. When you look at what a living wage is for Seattle, seamstresses here don't make a living wage, and it's highly skilled work, and I think they should make a living wage, let alone like seamstresses obviously in other countries. I think that would bring it up to like $38 an hour or something kind of wild like that, because it's expensive to live here, let me tell you. Right now, I'm multiplying that 14 hours by $25 an hour, which is the average salary of a seamstress I was able to find per hour, which is a labor total of $350. This was a lot of work, so that checks out to me. And that brings us to a grand total of $527.27. And obviously that total is both my labor and the cost of supplies. And then if you are a business, you should be calculating a certain percentage into being something you can invest into your own business and grow. So in theory, something like this would be more expensive. I mean, granted, other people are faster sewers than me, but I do think it is always really interesting to look at what the cost of a garment is, both with and without labor. It really shows you how disturbing it is that you can buy dresses for like $15. Just a reminder here, all clothing is made by hand. They do not have machines that can execute what a seamstress can do. Just something to think about. That is always what this little segment is about, but we have finished the how much did it cost. So now we're gonna talk about the actual garment itself. I'm first gonna talk about this blouse. So this is the blouse. It's great. So I did the larger bust version. So I have a size D cup. Definitely, I would say C and down can probably go with just the normal, but if you're a D or up, you're gonna need more. And honestly, not that it felt tight, but like it was definitely the right thing. It looks like really saggy and droopy and weird right now, but when it's on, it's definitely the correct size. I'm going to use this blouse a ton. The only downside right now for this blouse is not a sewing issue. It's that it's really hard to take on and off without getting like my makeup, or in this case my sunscreen. My sunscreen's tinted, which is super annoying. I just switched to a non-tinted one so that hopefully I won't be getting it on my clothes as much, but I will need to wash this guy. Otherwise, I love this blouse. I love this fabric. I will link this fabric down below. It's a white Dobby fabric and it is so freaking gorgeous. I want to make like a gajillion more blouses with this, but I ordered a ton of different white blouse fabrics from her shop. So also just like check out her white fabrics in general. She has an amazing amount in stock. And if you are a white blouse wearer like me who likes to layer them under things, it's really, really great for that. And yeah, I am really glad I moved the slit to the back. This just makes this so much more usable for me. I do think it like makes it like slightly less cute in this outfit. Like it would definitely be cuter if it had the slit in the front and you could tie the little bow. Making this alteration makes it much more practical for my wardrobe. I also think in the future I might try switching out the sleeves for a longer sleeve. And then for the dress itself, I didn't button it all the way because I'm irresponsible. Anyway, we always start with the flaws because I am trying to end on a positive note. One of the the flaws actually is the buttonholes. I didn't quite get my buttonhole chisel in here correct, so they're kind of frayed. I also just am not sure I love these buttons with it. Let me know what you guys think about these buttons. I tried like 5 or 6 different buttons with it, and I just had a hard time finding the right thing. This is definitely the best out of something in my stash, but I'm not completely sold on it. I tried like some black glass buttons. I think I could do like a covered button, but I just don't super love covered buttons. They aren't for me. So, and then as for the print, I absolutely adore this print. Again, you can pick this up in my Spoonflower store. I'll link this particular pattern down below. I think they look nice together. I think I had hoped this would print maybe even a little bit darker than it did. It didn't, and I know that things usually, so when you print on paper, things will print darker than they are on your screen, but I think it might be different for fabric, or maybe this is what it looked like on my screen and I'm just delusional. Other thing I would fix, you may have noticed in the reveal, the straps were kind of sliding off my shoulders. This is a common problem I have. I have really, I don't know what to call them. Slim shoulders, no shoulders, whatever. I have those, and so sometimes something like this, it's really easy for it to slide off my shoulder. So I'm gonna write a little note to myself that I need to take these up probably about like a ½ inch or so, and that should probably fix all the issues with this. Overall, I'm still just really happy with this. I wish I had put in pockets. I meant to remember to, and then I didn't. Which, to be fair, the seams are all in the back, so they would have been kind of weird pockets, but most dirndls I have pockets, or at least one pocket. I also went back and forth on whether I wanted to put a zipper down the back. I think if I make this dress again, I will put a zipper down the back. I know that's a lot of closures with the buttons down the front, but then if I was to do that, I would do the buttons down the front, and then I would not have this little gappy guy here. While this is normal on a traditional dirndl, I just don't super love that. I would rather just have a normal closure in the back, and since I'm not trying to make a traditional dirndl here, I'm just trying to make something kind of more peasant-y or princessy. That would work better for me. I would really like to try, there is also a lower bust version of the dirndl that I think looks really cute that I would really like to try. So I'm sure you will see this pattern again on this channel. That basically wraps this up. I hope you enjoyed this project. I definitely learned a lot. I learned how it could be neater, but I learned how to do it, and I did make myself do it, even though I kept wanting to give up, because I will note before I wrap up, their lawn, which is what I usually buy on Spoonflower, is really hard to get a needle through. It's a nightmare, and I don't have, is that I like the weight of their lawn, and I don't want the weight or the texture that comes with any of their other things, so just kind of puts me a little bit stumped. Sorry, I'm definitely rambling. So we're just gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, you can support me by buying me a coffee over on Ko-fi. As you know, I put a lot of time and dedication into this channel. As usual, there is all the free ways to support me, which is liking this video, giving it a thumbs up, and commenting down below. I always read all of your comments, and I really do enjoy them, even if I'm very slow at responding or never respond at all. I'm just, you know, an anxious person. But with that, I will hopefully see you next time. Bye!